evolutionary psychology.
Mating strategies across the sexes.
Emotionally display of dominance.
Evolution, you cuck.
Because women are weaker, feebler, don't have the same coordination, they don't have the same prowess, you know, ability to create things. This is all scientifically proven.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but you've evolved to be a whore. Today, we're going to talk about the way people use evolutionary psychology to fight feminism and women's rights. Hi, hello, my name's Anya, and I'm happy you're here. My backdrops have been changing in every video lately. That's because I've been moving around a lot. Currently, I'm in Georgia, the country, not the state. I'm in the capital, Tbilisi, and I really love it here. Evolutionary psychology, or Evopsych for short, looks at people's behaviors through the lens of natural and sexual selection. The key idea is that there were certain behaviors that helped our ancestors survive and reproduce. So we have evolved to have strong drives towards those same behaviors.
And this is science. I mean, in a way.
So for example, someone who's into Evopsych might say, it's natural for men to want to sleep with a lot of women because in the past, this maximized their chance of leaving offspring. Which, by the way, no judgment here, nothing wrong with sleeping around responsibly. Get out there, kings. But it is a little silly to use Evopsych to justify your own horn dog fantasies.
This might look like a woman doing her job, but observe, she has reddened her lips. This is done to simulate sexual arousal. This is clearly a female on the hunt for a high-value mate.
Evopsych is not a popular field, and if you've read Evopsych books, you will have noticed that the authors are really butthurt about this. Why do social sciences not play with us? Why are feminists so mean to us? Nobody gets us. Evopsych does have methodological issues, and it's not especially verifiable because knows what our ancestors were up to 100,000 years ago. But despite this, we lay people are deep in the Evopsych paradigm. Think about it. Everyone is constantly talking about things that are instinctive or that we're hardwired to do or how we're programmed to be this way, built to do that. Just throwing around all these assumptions about what's supposed to be part of our nature. There's two reasons I wanted to make this video. One is that Evopsych, unfortunately, is a legitimizer of misogyny. It is the book-lined lobby of the woman hater hotel. Laura Bates is a writer and researcher of online misogyny, and here's how she put it in an interview with Jon Favreau.
There's a lot of quite kind of scientific language that's mixed up in there as well. They want to create this idea that this is a really kind of scientific, in-depth worldview, when the reality is, of course, that it is just based on extreme misogyny.
The other reason I wanted to make this video is that I myself am unironically interested in evolutionary psychology, and that bothers me. Evopsych tells me things I don't necessarily want to believe are true, but that I don't find easy to dismiss. And there's plenty of very anti-women public intellectuals who can make pretty substantial points using Evopsych. Let's take Jordan Peterson, for example. If you don't know who this is, he used to be a professor and a psychologist, and now he's a very famous public intellectual who writes self-help books for men. In one of his podcasts, Jordan Peterson had Dr. David Buss on, who's like top lobster of the field of Evopsych, and together they managed to basically blame women for everything that men have done to women throughout history. The argument goes something like this. Due to the metabolic cost of pregnancy, women have an innate preference for men with resources. Therefore, it is in fact female-driven sexual selection that led to men having a disproportionate amount of power and resources throughout civilized history and to this day. Women chose the patriarchy, actually. Women chose for men to have all the things. The conclusion is bananas, but the argument itself is easy to follow and seems to make sense. That's why this topic is so important, because there's so many men and women and girls and boys out there who don't think of themselves as sexist, but who still believe these ideas. And so they end up falling into the, well, misogyny is all just biology kind of trap. I had a comment on a video a long time ago where someone said, Mother Nature is the true misogynist. Well, this video is about proving that no, in fact, the true misogynists are the misogynists, okay? And they need to start taking some responsibility. Not blame, necessarily, but responsibility. This video explains why evolutionary psychology doesn't predict us and doesn't even describe us. Except it does help you figure out if your female coworkers are sending you sexual signals.
You should also check if she's wearing heels. Females sometimes do this to tilt their pelvises, suggesting readiness to copulate.
Part 1. The Crisis.
Something ominous is happening to men in America.
And men are falling behind by every single metric.
Why are men in such crisis? I mean,
there certainly is a crisis of masculinity. Women are allowed to do so many of the things that only men could do before, that the definition of what it means to be a man is becoming less and less clear. Masculinity is being redefined. But conservative pundits seem to think that what we need to do, in America at least, is rewind to 1950, when it was easier for men to feel good about themselves, allegedly.
You're tearing me apart!
Whereas I think this crisis is a good thing. It's a crisis of growth. It's growing pains. To illustrate this point, I wanted to use a clip from a movie where a guy is transforming into something else and the process is painful. It turns out most of the scenes like this, the guy is turning into a monster, which seems ominous. And if you look online, it seems like the transformation of masculinity is going very poorly. It's going in the monster direction.
What did you take? Fuck the woman! Fuck the woman! What?
Part of Laura Bates's job is going into schools to talk to kids about things like consent and equality. And she says,
and a few years ago, there was a real shift in the attitudes of the young people I was working with, particularly young men, who were coming to sessions with some real misinformation that was quite deeply ingrained. So they were coming out with, feminism is an anti-men conspiracy theory, the gender pay gap is a myth, Me Too is a witch hunt, good men are losing their jobs, white men are the real oppressed minority these days, and so on.
And this is not bitter, divorced neckbeards saying this. These are teenage boys. The kids are, in fact, not all right. The YouTuber Sean did a really good job of describing the backdrop to this crisis.
Now, I'm going to say something relatively cruel, kind of an uncomfortable truth that I need to be careful about expressing. For dudes who just suck, like they're not particularly interesting or funny or kind or successful, for men who just don't have much to offer a woman, well, they used to be able to offer an income. They could at least be providers at a time when it was more difficult for a woman to provide for herself. However, with the advancement of women's rights in a lot of places over the last century, with women being able to go into higher education and work a wider range of jobs, gaining the ability to divorce husbands they don't like and so on, as well as it becoming increasingly acceptable to be unmarried later in life, there's simply less financial and social pressure on women to settle for men who just aren't very good.
Maybe what Sean is saying here sounds harsh, but manosphere influencers actually have pretty similar explanations for the problems men are facing. It's just their wording is much worse and they're angry.
15. A man's money now means nothing to women, as they can instead either work for themselves or rely on the government to provide resources instead.
The government is copying men.
The point is, the thesis is the same. Progress in women's rights made it harder to get a girlfriend. By the way, in case you don't know, the manosphere is basically the online world of male discontent. It includes various communities like incels, self-designated involuntarily celibate men, pickup artists, men's rights activists, and influencers like bro-y podcasters, idiots, self-help gurus, conservative pundits, pick-me women, and would-be philosophers. And I do actually have some empathy for the problems that men and boys in these manosphere communities are facing. Feeling lonely and thinking that no one you want to date will ever want to date you is painful, and it feels unfair. But saying things are unfair and crying, that's not very manly, is it now? That's not very alpha. So instead what you do is, you don't say it's not fair, you say it's not right. Things aren't right and it's someone's fault. Would you like to hazard a guess about whose fault it is? Yes, the ingrate females who were given all these rights and then decided to distribute the right to have sex with them unevenly across the male population. We need government-enforced sexual Marxism. These ungrateful trollops are posting butt pics on the internet for money and then not letting us grope the butts. Can we please just go back to a time when men were the ones profiting from female nudity? This becomes the key function of manosphere thought leaders. And my use of the words thought and leader here is generous to the point of idiocy. Their main job is helping young men justify their anger. To reinforce this point, I want to tell you a little story. Manosphere influencers are like Hercules. Wait, it's not a compliment. At one point, Hercules was tasked with cleaning out the stables of this king named Augeas. The king had 3,000 cows, and the cows were immortal. So there was a lot of shit in those stables. Hercules used his immense strength to redirect 2 rivers so that they ran through the stables and washed all of the shit out. This is what manosphere influencers do. They take young men's shit and redirect it at women. Before we move on, I have to let you know that I'm biologically hardwired to ask you to become patrons. Patrons get perks. For example, you get your name in the credits of every video. You can also get personalized shoutouts at the end of a video. And in the future, there's going to be more videos on there that are longer versions and uncensored versions of the stuff I put on YouTube. Link in the description below. Okay, let's go. Alpha fucks beta bucks. Part 2, the natural order of things. The key idea of the manosphere is that men and women are suffering because women and feminism have changed the natural order of things.
I believe the feminist movement is in large part to blame for the fracturing of the traditional home, where women were coerced outside of their natural roles as mothers into the workforce.
And Evopsych supposedly proves this. The speakers do not always have the firmest grasp of the concept, so I will be doing the charitable thing and supplementing their points with supporting arguments from Evopsych books. Here are the commandments of the manosphere and the evolutionary psychology they're based on. I just need to put on my special shirt.
What are you wearing?
Come on, it's a casual social outfit.
Looks like you're going to a fish fry, Dwight.
No, they're howling at the moon. It's suggestive to women because of howling during sex.
What do you think? I think women are going to be very attracted to me. A woman's role is mother and nurturer.
Women's job always was procreation, to look after the family and to look after the man. That's all that they had to do.
That's all you had to do, you ungrateful hussies. Evopsych explains this as follows. Females are responsible for gestation and lactation. That's 9 months of pregnancy, plus a minimum of 6 to 12 months of breastfeeding. During this entire time, the baby demands constant round-the-clock care and surveillance to have even the slightest chance of surviving. So women who were better at caring for their kids had higher reproductive fitness, meaning they had a higher chance of having a child who survives. Women are valuable if they're young and beautiful.
And you, my dear, are a depreciating asset. So every day that goes by, you're going to be less and less beautiful.
Even the host is like, whoa. The female reproductive window is shorter than the male, so it makes evolutionary sense for a male to long-term pair bond with a woman who is younger, so that he can get the maximum amount of babies out of her. So romantic it could be on a Hallmark card. Also, youth is correlated with fertility, and beauty, according to Evopsych, signifies good genes. Men are valuable if they are providers.
The reality is that women are biologically hardwired to want men that make more money than them and have more status than them. So you can say,
because motherhood essentially incapacitates women, those women who selected men who were able to invest resources in them and their offspring would have been at a considerable advantage in survival. I will say I do not know what this man can provide a woman other than secondhand embarrassment, but hey, women need to be chaste.
You asked me why body count matters. You were kind of pushing at me to... First off, it's a natural biological response in men that does not exist in women. And that comes down to paternity uncertainty.
I like that he enunciates paternity uncertainty because when you're talking to women, it's important to speak very clearly so that they understand you. Paternity uncertainty just describes the fact that because of female anatomy, it's not easy to tell who the father is if you don't have paternity tests and trust. In the past, promiscuity was dangerous for women in the sense that it carried the risk of getting pregnant and bearing a child without the benefits of an investing man. And for males, it was evolutionarily important to control female sexuality so that they didn't end up investing resources and time in a child that wasn't theirs. 5. It's good for men to sleep with a lot of women.
Every single sultan had more than one woman. Look at the history, read the Bible, it's all there.
According to Evopsych, human males can afford to go both for quality and quantity in terms of reproduction. They can invest lots of time and resources in one woman and their shared children. That's the quality approach. And that way they maximize the chance of those kids surviving. And they can also go the quantity route, sleep with as many women as they possibly can, and hope that some of those women go on to have kids that survive. So those are the commandments, the rules. Now, I want to explain one thing. In this video, I'm not trying to completely dismiss evolutionary psychology as a valid science. I don't need to do that to prove that these guys are full of shit. Even if we were to assume that every single thing Evopsych says is completely, totally, utterly valid, the conclusions that these intellectual powerhouses draw are bullshit. The thing is, as you'll see, unfortunately, Evopsych is just so theoretical, so far removed from reality, that you can only really use it as a surfboard in the ocean of your own delusion. Any person who has a life in the physical realm understands that these are not rules anyone has to live live by. Because for rules to be rules, there needs to be some value from following them. For example, don't touch fire because it's hot. I follow that rule, and it works out great for me. Let's take the chastity rule, for example. There is no value for me here because, despite all the evidence to the contrary, I am not, in fact, a Victorian-era cobbler's daughter, whose best chance at a good life is to marry a man who will feed and clothe me in exchange for my piety and my willing womb. Nowadays, we've got contraception, birth control, paternity tests, relative economic independence, a different social moral structure. So there's really no reason for men or women to not sleep with anyone they please. Body count can only matter in the sense that it might signify certain personality traits like impulsivity, openness to new experience, spirituality. So you think everything is good, live and let live, but no. You see, these are, according to the manosphere, biological truths.
If you get out of a bad relationship, you should learn evolutionary psychology about what women actually biologically want from you.
Even if you think you're happy, if you're not living by these rules, you're actually unhappy.
And with every woman that I've worked with, there is this deep, deep, deep desire, regardless of what she says externally, to submit to the leadership of a man that she knows can properly hold down the emotional space and really put her interest at the forefront. Regardless of what she says externally.
In the next chapters, we're going to go over why these are, in fact, not biological truths. Part 3, cherry picking. Noam Chomsky is widely considered to be one of the most influential intellectuals alive today. And he has said that we need to be skeptical of evolutionary psychology because
what evolutionary psychology, as it's now called, sociobiology, used to be, teaches us about the nature of humans. But the problem is it doesn't teach us anything much at all. When you get to something as complex as human beings, what you just find is almost anything you look for.
Here's a silly example that illustrates Chomsky's words, in which Joe Rogan finds exactly what he's looking for. In case you don't know, Joe Rogan is one of the top podcasters in the world, and his audience is mainly male. Here, Joe and Adam Conover of the Adam Ruins Everything show are talking about beauty ideals. Joe says that he thinks beauty ideals don't change because they're biologically prescribed.
This narrative of men being attracted to the woman with large breasts and a small waist and a big ass, where do you think that started? Because this is like evolutionary biology is pretty much settled on the idea that the reason why is the large hips would indicate that the woman would be easier to give birth. Having large breasts and a large ass would indicate that she has she's fertile, and then she has ample fat storage.
Adam disagrees and says he thinks beauty ideals change with the culture.
That's what we're told from an early age. That this is the sort of women that men are attracted to, and so a lot of men end up adopting that, right?
And it's true, we can see very different beauty icons at different times in our history. Look at Kate Moss and Kim Kardashian. Kate Moss's body was considered ideal in the 90s especially, and Kim's in the 2010s. They obviously have very different body shapes, but they are both beauty icons. Kim's body is more voluptuous, and it seems to fit Joe Rogan's description better. But guess what? Evolutionary psychology also has an explanation for why Kate's body is ideal. According to Evopsych, the #1 marker by which men measure a woman's attractiveness is youth, because youth correlates with fertility and overall health. And Kate's slender body shape looks more youthful than Kim's voluptuous one. If we look farther back, we'll see other shapes idolized in culture. These thick queens are called Paleolithic Venuses, and there's some research that suggests that their shape is connected to what evolution demanded of people at the time. Dr. Richard Johnson writes, "They rank among the earliest art and endured from 38,000 to 14,000 years before present, one of the most arduous climactic periods in human history." The theory is that because survival required sufficient nutrition for childbearing women, the overnourished woman became an ideal symbol of survival and beauty during episodes of starvation and climate change in Paleolithic Europe. So it seems as though different female shapes were idolized at different points in human history. It also looks like not only does evolution influence culture, but culture influences evolution. In fact, it's almost as though evolution is not as straightforward as these beacons of intelligence would have us believe. Part 4, hyperevolution. What do we mean when we say something is natural? As far as I can tell, natural often means things that are old and good, and unnatural means new and bad. The problem is, everyone has a different opinion on when the natural stuff ended and the unnatural stuff began. If you're a crunchy granola type, you might say, walking barefoot is natural, shoes are unnatural. I need to live my truth, spread my toes, and give myself compound fractures tromping around our asphalted cities in ugly, thin-soled shoes. If you're a certain type of guy, you might say sugar babies natural, women having jobs unnatural, and if you ask that guy how exactly is everyone providing for all the sugar babies, he will kick you out of his podcast. I would argue that everything about human beings is natural. We are little clumps of blood and meat and lymph and hurt feelings. Every thought and feeling I have is biological. My desire to have a baby is biological. My desire to earn money is also biological. When a feminist thought forms in my brain, it is not because progressive black magic has possessed my body. We tend to think of our brains as computers. Culture is software, and our brain architecture is the hardware that never changes. But this metaphor is wrong. Joseph Henrich is a professor of evolutionary biology at Harvard, and he's in the top 0.01% of academics in the world by citation, which means he's super mega cool. Here's how he explains the problem with the computer metaphor.
One of the challenges to understanding psychology is we have this digital computer metaphor. So people tend to think about their brains like a computer, and they expect there to be hardware and software. So psychologists often think they study the hardware, and they leave it to the sociologists and anthropologists to study the software. But it turns out our brains are somewhere in between where they can create firmware. They can make new hardware, new connections that don't exist if you don't experience a certain environment.
One example of this firmware that Henrich provides is reading.
And so when people learn to read, we can actually see that they get specialized circuitry in the left hemisphere, they get a thicker corpus callosum, they get whole brain activation for speech, even though what they're being trained to do is read. And so you actually have physical changes to the brain as a consequence of basically a cultural training routine.
Reading isn't an example of evolution proper because it's still not heritable. If you learn how to read, your kid will still also have to learn how to read. But there's lots of other cultural innovations that did lead to heritable traits. A famous example is lactose tolerance. Adult humans used to be universally lactose intolerant, but as agriculture became more common, being able to digest dairy became an advantage. So the mutation that creates lactose tolerance spread across populations, especially among people who had a really hard time finding something to eat. I'm thinking that maybe this is why Slavs go so hard for dairy. I mean, we don't just have kefir and smetana, we also have rязанка, varinets, простокваша. I guess if you had long, cold winters and only cabbage and potatoes to see you through, milk curd would seem amazing. I'm making it sound like I don't like milk curd. Milk curd is amazing. Tvorog. Today, in the United States, only about 1/3 of people don't have this mutation and can't enjoy cheese. Sucks to suck. Agriculture gave us a new heritable trait in 10,000 years. Normie evolution takes hundreds of thousands of years. So in this sense, culture is hyper-evolution. And culture and technology have changed everything. The air we breathe, how we move, what we eat, what we see. And what I see is a lot of men who are barely coping. But the good news is we can change that. This is David Buss on Jordan Peterson's podcast. Jordan Peterson is a giant simp for David Buss. He would die for this man. If we're comparing humans to animals, then when Jordan Peterson sees David Buss, he rolls over to show him his belly. They've just finished discussing how women created patriarchy through sexual selection, and then Buss says this.
If women changed their mate preferences so that they didn't care about status and resources and those qualities, and you iterated that over enough generations, yeah, it would ultimately change male behavior.
They have a good chuckle about how stupid feminists are because they don't understand that women will always choose dominant, high-status men because it's our biology. Except they forget to mention that high status can mean a number of different things. Maybe it's the funniest man, or the kindest, or the smartest. There is no one universal big hierarchy because, and I cannot repeat this enough, we are not lobsters. And now it's time to introduce this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN. If you want to have access to content libraries from all over the world, protect your private data from hackers and snoops, and avoid censorship, you should try out ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is the world's top-rated virtual proxy network. It's got military-grade encryption, it's faster than the other VPNs I've used, and there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it for free. ExpressVPN has servers in 94 countries, so you can use it to access content from all over the world. For example, currently I'm watching It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is not available on Netflix US, but is available on Netflix Great Britain. I'm a big fan of ExpressVPN, and you will be too, so go check it out. To sign up, go to the video description, click my personalized link, and you'll get 3 months free when you sign up for a 12-month plan. Part 5. Murder is also natural. In the manosphere, people often seem to think that what is natural is morally neutral and uncontrollable. But then what about our very natural, ancient little habit of murdering each other? David Buss writes, "Murder is fundamentally in our nature because over the eons of human evolution, murder was so surprisingly beneficial in the intense game of reproductive competition. But we have legal, social, and moral laws that prohibit murder. The entire history of human civilization is us trying to tame nature and by extension ourselves. It's the whole reason why we develop these fat-ass cortexes, to have some control over the more ancient parts of our brains. And that is a good thing. Nobody's trying to shackle rugged, untamable masculinity, if that's what people are thinking. My cortex gives me a relatively high degree of control over my brain. For example, if my brain was attracted to a man like Andrew Tate, I would cut open my head and throw out my hypothalamus. Another very old and natural habit of ours is male violence towards women. Evopsych believes that most of this violence falls under the category of something called mate guarding. Mate guarding is exactly what it sounds like. It's trying to stop your mate from having children with someone else. David Buss writes, "In a cross-cultural perspective, the ways in which men attempt to control women's sexuality is nothing short of bewildering. See, guys, even your boy thinks it's weird. Veiling a woman's face is an attempt to conceal a woman's sexual signals from other men. Forms of genital mutilation seem designed to dissuade women from seeking sexual pleasure." In a later book, Buss also tags intimate partner violence, rape, honor killings, sexual and emotional abuse, and coercive control in relationships as forms of mate guarding. These are cruel and violent practices, but in many parts of the world, they're barely considered a crime. For example, in Russia, domestic abuse is decriminalized, and there's an old Russian proverb that says, "Бьет, значит любит," which means if he hits you, that means he loves you. I need to make more content about Russia, honestly. There is a lot to discuss. Manosphere podcasters like saying that men wanting a woman who is not a hoe is not misogynist, it's just a personal preference. If it's a personal preference, why do you keep saying that it's a biological truth? Women are being brutally punished worldwide right now for being sexual beings. That is why telling a woman that she shouldn't be sexual is not a neutral thing to say. And calling a woman a hoe isn't like other insults. Part 6. Lipstick.
Why do you make your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal. That's why. Why do you put rouge on your cheeks? Same reason.
So, Jordan Peterson, clearly part of the core cast of this video, had an interview with Vice, in which he said that one of his concerns about an integrated workspace is the fact that if women come in looking sexy, men will be confused. I'm gonna take his argument seriously, because I am being earnest as fuck here, okay? I thought about why I wear makeup, and the truth is, I do wear makeup to look attractive. And to be completely honest with you, when girls say things like, "I don't wear makeup for other people, I wear it for me," I never quite understand what they mean. But then I thought about makeup looks like the ones in Euphoria. This is clearly not about quote-unquote signaling sexual arousal. This is about individuality and artistry and fashion, and historically makeup was also used for lots of different reasons. Ashwanta Jackson writes for JSTAR, quote, "In ancient Egypt, all genders used makeup as part of a daily routine. In ancient Greece, prostitutes had to wear lipstick by law to distinguish them from non-sex workers." That sounds like something Professor Peterson would like. In Rome, it was an indicator of high social status, and suffragettes used lipstick as an emblem of women's emancipation. Makeup also has a spiritual function. Henna body art is widely used in weddings in South Asia, both for the bride and groom, and it signifies prosperity and good luck. And in South Africa, the Xhosa tribe paint boys' faces as part of the ritual that symbolizes their passage into manhood. I'm not saying that when I put makeup on, it's a religious practice, but it does feel like a meaningful ritual. I mean, I sit down and I focus on myself and I brush my face with various brushes. It's the closest I've ever come to self-care. By the time I'm done, my energies are all aligned and moisturized. Makeup is also used in military and other conflict situations, as camouflage or for intimidation. Makeup is a mask, and I don't mean caked up foundation. I mean it's a tool that, like a mask, can change your perceived identity. Makeup can be aggressive. It can make you feel powerful. Sometimes when I'm doing my makeup, I feel like Shoshana Dreyfus, about to go burn down a cinema full of Nazis.
And I've been putting on fire.
I guess, after all, I do wear makeup for me. That was my generous response to Jordan Peterson. My ungenerous response is this. Human beings express romantic and sexual interest in each other in a variety of different context-specific ways. Does Jordan Peterson walk into office buildings, see red lipstick, and turn into a werewolf? Because he certainly seems to be implying that men are animals who cannot comprehend that lipstick means one thing in one context and another in another context. You know, men wear suits to work with shoulder pads that make them look bigger and stronger. But I do not expect them to start wrestling in the conference room in a mating ritual display of dominance. Part 7. Zero utility. In his comments about evolutionary psychology, Noam Chomsky also said this.
You want to find aggressiveness and violence and sadism, yeah, we can find that. We don't need evolutionary psychology to tell us about it. We see it in the world.
Here's an example that proves his point. In the late 1970s, evolutionary psychologists Martin Daly and Margot Wilson theorized that stepkids are more vulnerable to abuse than biological kids. Later, they proved this hypothesis. However, both Daly and Wilson point out that they did not discover this phenomenon. Quote, "Cruel stepparents are staple characters in folklore from every corner of the globe."
Oh, please, you don't think that
Hold your tongue. So like Chomsky says, we don't need Evopsych to tell us that. We can see it in the world. The other issue is that Evopsych doesn't really offer solutions to the problems it identifies. Evopsych is always trading in distal causes, the kind of ultimate whys, which is very cool and interesting, but there's so many other closer factors that affect things too. This means that Evopsych explanations end up being incredibly general. Obviously, there are so many adoring, wonderful stepparents who love their kids to bits. And even in the cases where stepparents are abusive, can you imagine a social worker coming to a home and saying, you see, your dad doesn't like you because you don't have any of his genes. So factors like mental health, family history, socioeconomic status end up being way more important because we can actually affect those things. Conclusions. If you're talking to a man who refers to women as females, you have two courses of action. 1, run away, and 2, divert the conversation by saying that you think Christopher Nolan movies are overhyped. If you really want to include Evopsych as part of your worldview, you should read the actual books and not listen to Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan. Read all the tearful evolutionary psychologists repeating over and again that their findings should not be interpreted as scripture. Adaptive is not to be equated with moral, right, optimal, attractive, and the like. Also, I recommend instead reading more evolutionary biology. It's much more legit. I want to finish with a quote from the wonderful Bell Hooks. "To create loving men, we must love males. Loving maleness is different from praising and rewarding males for living up to sexist-defined notions of male identity. Caring about men because of what they do for us is not the same as loving males for simply being. In patriarchal culture, males are not allowed simply to be who they are and to glory in their unique identity. Their value is always determined by what they do. In an anti-patriarchal culture, males do not have to prove their value and worth. They know from birth that simply being gives them value, the right to be cherished and loved." Well, I hope you liked the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And if you did enjoy the video, please consider becoming a patron. Your support would mean a lot to me and help me make more videos. And here are the lovely patrons.